Hello Year 12. Well, we made it. We have finished our entire topic on the period of dual power in Russia, and we have covered everything now. So it's time for us to draw together what we've learned, and we are going to use it to answer an essay style question. So here's our essay question. How far do you agree that Lenin and the Bolsheviks were responsible for the fall of the Provisional Government in October 1917? We'll look a little bit more at how to address the question in a moment, but first let's remind ourselves where we are going to go for support with this. And there are three main resources that you should call on if you get stuck. First, your textbook and your class notes over the past half term, including the work that you've been doing so well for me since we went on lockdown. Secondly, you've got some notes from the last couple of lessons on the latest evidence from revisionist historians. It would be really good to see some of that going into this particular essay. And lastly, I've made another resource for you. It's what I'm calling an epic overview video. It's over an hour long on YouTube. It basically goes through the entire period of dual power. So if there's anything that you've missed along the way, or anything that you're still unclear on that you want to go back and take another look at, that is the video for you. And you might not all from start to finish. You can dip in and out of it, but it would be really helpful to you, I hope. So let's look again at our question for a moment. In this particular essay, we are going to be explaining the reasons why the provisional government fell. And we've been given one factor already in the question that we need to focus on. That's Lenin and the Bolsheviks. Notice that's a little bit broader than just what did Lenin do. Lenin and the Bolsheviks, so that draws in other strengths that the Bolsheviks had besides just Lenin himself. And don't forget, we have a very specific time frame in our question as well. We're not just writing about why the provisional government fell. Why did it fall specifically in October of 1917? We also need to address that in our answer. So, as with all of these Unit 2 essays, we're going to follow a similar kind of structure. We're going to have an introduction, and we're going to need to lay out there what our argument is going to be. And then we're probably going to write 3 sections in our answer. I'm not going to call them paragraphs because often they're more than a paragraph. So we're going to call them 3 sections. Section 1 is going to be about factor X. Now that's the factor we were given in the question, Lenin and the Bolsheviks. And we'll need to analyse and explain the role played by Lenin and the Bolsheviks in the fall of the provisional government in October of 1917. And then we're going to need to evaluate how important Lenin and the Bolsheviks were in bringing the provisional government down. The other 2 sections of your answer will focus on 2 factors which you have chosen. I've called them factor Y and factor Z. In both cases, you're going to need to analyse and explain what part they played in the fall of the provisional government. And you will also need to evaluate them in relation to factor X. So which was more important? And you will need to justify your position on that carefully. At the end, remember, we're going to have a conclusion. And a good conclusion will be one that states our overall decision, acknowledges the opposing view, and then puts forward your winning points to justify your overall decision. If you're starting now to think about what factors you might write about in your answer, here are 4 suggestions worth thinking about. You could write about the weaknesses of the provisional government. Remember, right at the start of this unit, we looked at some of the problems and weaknesses facing the provisional government right at the start of the period of dual power. And we even made a little chart together about reasons to be optimistic for the provisional government's chances and reasons to be pessimistic. So you might want to refer to that. Second factor worth considering might be the policies of the provisional government and the way in which it tried to address some of the big problems it faced, particularly through the summer of 1917. I'm talking here in particular about the war, the land question, and the economy. Third factor you might consider would be the mistakes made by Kerensky himself. And in particular, you might touch on his June offensive, his decisions during the Kornilov affair, and his actions in October when he moved against the Bolsheviks. And it's arguable he triggered their takeover. And lastly, factor 4. Now, this is the factor you have to write about because it was the one in the question, Lenin and the Bolsheviks. You might think here about how the Bolsheviks maintained their distance from the other socialist parties. You might think about the Bolsheviks' policies, which were more radical and more in tune with the workers', soldiers' and peasants' goals. You might think about the organisation and discipline of the Bolshevik Party, and you might challenge that a little with some of the findings of revisionist historians. Similarly, you might look at the role of Lenin and how important he was within the party. And you could look at the role of Trotsky and his role in delaying the takeover of power so that the Bolsheviks would be able to mask it as a takeover by the Soviet. You could also think about where the Bolsheviks' support was concentrated and the fact that many of their supporters were located around the 2 major revolutionary cities, Petrograd and Moscow. Now, as well as writing about these Bolshevik strengths, you're going to need to start to think about whether some of them were more important than others. Now, if you're still not clear on this, and you haven't really yet made up your mind on which factors were more important, you might think about this. So before you start to plan or write your essay, you could sit down and have a think about these questions. They're just questions to get you thinking about some of the issues around the essay and to help you to make up your mind about what your argument is going to be. Now, you could jot down your answers and you could get in touch with one of your friends in the class to compare your answers with them and find out whether or not they agree with you or whether there are any differences of opinion. So check Show My Homework for the deadline for this essay. Good luck, and I will look forward to reading your answers.